is the Equity Diversity Action Plan.
Did we take off the?
They all go to the
Everything
end of the action items.
Moments.
Yeah.
I have a.
Is there a motion to approve? So moved.
Second.
Discussion?
I had a question about who. I remember in some of the documents, and I believe in our study session, there was a little bit of reference about who the point person is for this project. But I want to know, who is the administrator? Who is the go-to person on the Equity Diversity Action Plan?
Right now it's Carolyn and I. We are trying to do some outreach to see if we can identify an appropriate individual who could come in and serve as a coordinator for moving this plan forward, and potentially as a transition to some type of permanent position in the equity arena in our district, if that's what the result of the focus groups and the data analysis, if that's one of the directions it points us in. So we're trying to reach out right now to different contacts, people we've been working with around this plan, to see if they know anybody, because it's an ambitious plan. It's got a lot of elements to it, and it's likely not going to be practical for Carolyn or I to try and continue to move it forward. It will likely go smoother and more rapidly if there's somebody who can dedicate themselves solely to moving it forward.
And the thing I like about that too, as you're saying that, is that it also gives somebody that, you know, to report to both of us, to engage the board and the administration that's not on either side. You know, that's more, no, I don't mean it adversarially, but, you know, as neutral party looking at all, it can help us all to come to the same understanding or ways of, you know, for the board and for the administration in the equity, to help us all be on the same kind of deal.
I'm not looking for somebody, we'll be dealing with various consultants, I think, to do professional development and other kinds of training and the outreach, the focus groups. I'm not looking for somebody necessarily to do that work. I'm looking for somebody to serve as an overall coordinator for tying the various elements of the plan together and motivating the right people to move it forward. So, does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
And I was just actually corresponding with Malia LaCure from the Puget Sound ESD today, kind of talking about these characteristics, what we're looking for in the role, and so she's tapping into her network of folks in the region to see if there might be somebody good to recommend to us.
I liked it very much. I was wondering, and it's kind of broad, is once you've maybe found someone to partner, will there be a more specific?
Well, I think that right now there's a combination, I would agree, of broad and specific items within here. I mean, there's the three general components or categories of actions, and then they all have their sort of initiatives associated with them. It's my sense that as we move forward and learn more and get smarter about what the state of our community is and what the experiences of our community members are, that the plan will begin to refine itself. It will point us in certain directions, and so I think there is a level of specificity that will develop over time as we continue to move forward.
That's what I was hoping to hear. And do we have personnel or money designated for this at this point? I know that in our previous study session, it was kind of a vague thing and it didn't seem really tight. So are we talking about?
We're definitely talking about spending money. I probably need to spend a little bit, we need to get a little bit of greater understanding of what some of the consultants we're already talking with are going to charge us, and we got a little bit of that. I mean, some of it's not nominal, but it's, you know, if you're talking about the work we're doing with Caprice and Cultures Connecting, well, they come in and it's, you know, a certain daily charge, and we have a number of days we'll be using them. It's not going to be in the grand scheme of the $200 million plus budget a huge amount of money. We get to the point of having somebody who comes in to serve as a coordinator role, and we're looking for them to be more or less, half-time right now is kind of what I'm thinking about. That's going to have, a more substantial price tag on it. So we'll definitely need to think about that in the overall scope of our budgets. We already have, in my budget and in the board's budget, budget line items for consultation fees or consultant fees, those kinds of things when we bring in folks from WASDA. So there already are some budget resources that are allocated. We'll have to see how the overall expenses line up with those particular budget line items. I'm assuming this is going to be a primary focus of our work in the coming years, not necessarily an add-on to other things we might be doing, but we'll perhaps replace some of those other types of activities with new ones.
Sounds great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Do we have a time frame for each task? Are we getting a time frame for each task?
We're hoping to sort of set a generalized timeline. There are definitely some things that we want to complete within certain timelines. For example, the revising our threat assessment process, revising our law enforcement engagement process and procedures. Those are all things that we are committed to having in place by the start of the 2015-16 school year. The focus group work and some of those types of things, it's going to depend a bit on the availability of our consultants or how much time we think we may need, or how broad we want our focus groups to be. Do we want to do a dozen focus groups, or do we want to do 4 dozen focus groups? That's going to entail different amounts of time. So we have a meeting, Carolyn and I, we're calling it our advisory team, for lack of a better term, but it's, Shannon and Rob Larson and Caprice and just the various parties that are advising us. We have a meeting with them on sometime in July, earlier in July, to really start mapping some of these things out with more detail and specificity.
So at the last meeting, I requested that we could have, 1 or 2 board members be able to attend some of these meetings, so that might be a good.
And we have one final meeting this week on Thursday with
Right, but
somebody
that's
that
to
you
get a
referred to us.
board, that's for the board training, is who we're looking at. But I mean, when it comes to like this plan, I think it's, it'd be nice if 1 or 2 of the board members are invited so they can, come back and report back to us and.
Learn alongside you.
And maybe take turns.
Yeah, I'm totally, I think it would be great.
I think it'll
to
be
part of,
efficient in the long run.
I mean, when we have these situations and we have 250 people in the audience, they're coming in, directing their comments to the board, and I know I was caught off guard with some of it. So I think being a part of it helps us to connect back to what's going on in the community and what we're doing about it. And being able to ask I think the board will ask some different questions too.
On the threat assessment piece, I did receive a letter today from a parent asking about that specifically, and she reminded me of a conversation that we had, I think at the last meeting, where there was a man that addressed the board, and it seemed to be from superintendent comments that it was believed that the man was trying to push his own company, and he was not. And that was a feeling that the audience got, it was a feeling that I got, that the district was thinking the man was trying to, and I don't remember the man's name, push his own company. And I got a letter today that reiterated again that he was not trying to do that, but that the community was interested in follow-up on threat assessment.
So we are, we're consulting more with people in the arena of threat assessments within the school environment. So if I conveyed the impression that I thought this man was simply here on a mercenary level to to advance his company, I didn't mean to convey that. I looked his company up online. They deal with corporate espionage and those kinds of things that did not seem to be the best fit for what we're looking at. We're looking for adolescents and young people in a school environment who are troubled and say and do things that we need to respond to in an appropriate manner, that's perhaps a different realm than being concerned about sweeping conference rooms for listening devices and some of the things that that company does. So it's more about match than it is about not being interested in what he has to offer.
He stated pretty clearly in his first visit to us that that wasn't his intent.
Yeah, right. Yeah. He made that clear, I think, in all of his communications.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, any other questions?
It's a very detailed report, thank you.
All right, so we'll call for a vote. And that also passes unanimously. Next item on the agenda is the Maltby site development. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Any questions, discussion on this?
Can I just offer a clarifying piece here before you call for a vote? So I just want to be sure that the board understands, we've talked about this a number of different times, but this action, if approved by the board, will permission us to move forward with more detailed site planning and analysis, including preparations of moving towards incorporation of a school on this site as sort of the driving element of our 2018 bond measures. So very similar to the process we went through with North Creek. So I just want the board to understand, we will start spending money now on that future school possibility on that site.
So that was actually one of my questions was, do we have an estimate of how much money we're anticipating? And then if for some reason we don't go that route or a bond doesn't pass, is it a sunk cost that eventually we could, we're not out, we're not in some situation where we're doing some pre-planning, spending money that if for some reason we don't go down this road, it'll still be sitting there waiting for us.
So I would have to defer to Ryan and Karen on some specific dollars that might be comparable to North Creek, but I would say we have the demonstrated need for a new facility now, and even as we look at, you received the projections of 2017-18 enrollment, post-boundary adjustments and grade reconfiguration, which still demonstrate that we'll have a number of schools larger than we would care to have them in the north end of the district. So
I just don't want to be presumptive of a bond passing in our community and kind of making sure that we're kind of balancing that.
I understand that. It's a question of timing and how quickly we can be positioned to move to provide the relief that people are looking for. So I absolutely understand the concern. I think it was the same dynamic we had around North Creek High School. And I think it will be important for us again to be out and very visible and upfront, explaining to people what the need is and why we are moving forward with the planning now, so we can be prepared to act more quickly. And that seemed to resonate pretty well with the 80 groups I spoke with last time around. Doesn't assure passage of the bond for sure.
And if I could just add on a parent note and being a community member in that North End area, there's definitely in our area lots and lots of talk and wondering why this can't happen sooner. And so I think if we were not to start this until 2018 and then we're putting it off, I mean, we're going to have a lot of unhappy people. And
I think you're correct. I think there are a lot of people who have expectations that we should be moving more proactively.
have this, an elementary by this year.
Yes.
2 years.
Just order one from someone.
No, exactly.
So Ryan, can you speak a little bit to sort of what we might anticipate as sort of some of the pre-development costs?
Sure. We can look at somewhere between $250,000 to about $2 million. It really depends on where you are
That's a
in
great
the process.
question.
It is, and I think it depends on how far the board would like us to go in the permitting process. So as we get into the permitting process, we'll have to have all of our design and schematic at about 90% identified. So, part of what we want to start is going through some of the understanding the jurisdictional requirements. I think that's going to be the big thing that we're going to take a look at. Part of it is we want to bring on an architect to really start looking at citing something out on there. And we need to look at some of the changes and requirements around wetland changes. So that's going to be all part of the requirements we have. We also know that the site's going to be somewhat challenging with the big utilities that they have around that area. So there's going to be other public entities weighing in as far as what their requirements will be. And we're just trying to get a better understanding of what that looks like.
And instructionally, one of our big tasks before us as well is to do some visioning and thinking about aligning both our capacity needs as well as instructional program needs. Should this be a K-5 school? Should this be a K-8 school? Should this be a K-5 school supersized, K-5 school with a 6-8 option? There are a number of different possibilities that we'll want to do some thinking about, but we've got to intersect both our capacity and our instructional program drivers to
Yeah, the visioning will really determine what we go in for our conditional use permit with the jurisdictions. So
The
we'll have-
maximum amount is, maximize the space of the supersize.
Well, the other thing Ryan and I have talked about quite a bit too is if possible, as we can go through this analysis, particularly as we look at wetlands and the developable property on the Maltby site, I think it would be ideal and to our benefit if we could pre-plan to site 2 schools on that site if possible, sort of a Skyview, Canyon Creek type of, or a Leota, Wellington, or North Shore Woodmore type of arrangement where we have 2 schools essentially sharing a common campus. That's going to depend on how much property we can develop and how we choose to design up versus out.
Okay, so, because I'm the warrant officer,
Sure.
I'm frequently stunned at the amount of money we spend on architects. So when you use the word architect, my mind immediately went to the 2 million range.
Of course.
And do we actually ask the architects to draw up all of the options? What do we do? Because we spend an unbelievable amount of money on
Sure. Let me
architects.
see if I can help address that by going through the process we went through for the new high school. So typically the first thing we do is sort of 2 parallel tracks. We try to identify with the county some of our jurisdictional requirements, setbacks that we have. But in a parallel process, we're going through a visioning with the instructional team. So we're trying to get a better understanding of what the instructional needs will be. And as we start looking at those 2 parallel tracks, at some point they sort of fold in into, okay, we have an idea of we want to build 1 school or 2 school or a K-8 school. Once that all happens, then we start necking that down with our architects to really design what this functional use of the buildings will be, heating elements, footprints, envelopes, et cetera, et cetera. And yes, architects are expensive.
No kidding. So, but they're only, you get what you want first before you start paying them to draw up all the different versions. You don't get a whole bunch of different versions of what you might possibly be dreaming of.
No, we don't look at a dream. We typically identify a vision first before we start really getting into the options that we can take a look at. And the options will really be dependent upon the available site we have, how high we have to build, how much footprint we have to use outside, what our setbacks will be, real similar to the high school, what the requirements will be from their jurisdictions around road improvements, sidewalk improvements. So there's going to be a bunch of different things that we'll have to continue to go through. It's probably, typically, I think we spent about 2 years on a planning process for the high school before we went in with a conditional use permit to the jurisdictions.
So who's the architect that we're using right now?
We're not sure right now, that's why we're asking for approval.
Okay. do we not have one that kind of has a contract with us for
I-
projects that
I
are?
believe we have 3 or 4
Yeah, it's
on
just
the
stable
list
or-
right now, so we go out every
Yeah.
4 years and seek an architect and engineer approval list. So we have 4 on the list right now.
We didn't even have group homes.
Thank you.
Could be, that's an option.
And there are advantages and disadvantages to continuing to work with, say, Dykeman, as we're working with in North America. So we're talking about all of those things. But I just wanted the board to be, I didn't want to engender a long conversation, but I just wanted to be clear that this action item
We'll spend money.
is, we will start spending money at some level on pre-planning for a future school on the Maltby site. That'll be part of the 2018 bond.
Do we have a cap though? I mean, in all seriousness, is there a cap on this or is it just?
But saying 2 million was
I
that
mean,
the
when we're
kind-
taking this action, I mean, do we have a cap?
It could be a start of the cap. So that could be the number we use,
All right.
work up to that number.
Well,
I do feel uncomfortable with it, could be, I mean,
it's just open-ended.
I feel that we really do need to start this process. I mean, we need to start it, but I do feel a little uncomfortable with, it could be 250 or it could be 2.5 million, so. that's-
What
I
I,
understand what you're saying, that's just kind of an uncomfortable position to tap my vote yes button.
sure, I guess for us, if we want to get to a point where we have a vision and a drawing ready going for conditional use, it's going to cost you $2 million.
But that's a 2-year process.
It's about a 2-year process.
And we would have other points,
Check-in points.
check-in points
Yes.
before that full 2 million 2-year
So real
process.
similar to, I think, what Karen provides for you on a monthly basis. I think she provides a capital facility update.
Right.
I think one of the projects on there will be multi-site XYZ.
Are there costs that escalate if we wait to start until the 2018 bond? I mean, are we being fiscally responsible by doing some of this ahead of time as well?
Well, I think there's 2 things we are being responsible for. Is one, that the jurisdictional requirements change on a yearly basis. So you might see greater setbacks if you wait a little bit longer, means less footprint to use on your building. But yes, there is always escalation on the construction
They never
side.
get easier, do they?
In fact, I think there's more restrictions, I think, the more we wait. And we've seen that over time, over the last 10 or 20 years.
On the flip side, I think the price to probably get an architect right now is highest with the market being so hot right now. And so I just know everything's kind of going up, and I think we might have even talked about this. So, I mean, you could potentially, I mean, I guess you can't judge an up market, and you can't judge a down market, so you're kind of better off doing.
Get the cheap.
I mean, yeah.
And I think, to your point, Kimberly, earlier, that you're demonstrating to the community that there is relief in sight, that we are working to be as responsive as possible and as proactive as possible within our abilities. So that's a non-monetary value,
Yeah,
but
for sure.
Sandy, to answer your question, could we use this, if we spent the money, could we use this design and plan? And the answer is yes.
It could go in a file cabinet if we need.
We could put in a file cabinet, dust it off, and when we pass them on, and update it.
That's helpful.
Thank you.
thank you very much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, board members, for great dialogue. Any further discussion? Seeing none, we'll call for a vote. And that also passes unanimously. Next item on the agenda is the core curriculum material for K-12 digital literacy, KHS English, and CTE engineering. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Sorry, did I say KHS? CHS. Any discussion on this item?
I had a question with the project Lead the Way Intro to Engineering. Where is that? Where are we using that?
That's scheduled to start at Woodinville High School this fall.
Okay, great. Cool, thank you. That's all I needed.
Seeing no additional questions, we'll call for a vote. Did I give you enough time? We can. Did I give you enough time?
I have a flight I have to meet. So
Yes.
All right, you can call for a vote.
I'll be moving along. I did. You're the only one that hasn't.
All right, and that passes unanimously. Next item on the agenda is resolution number 724, redirection of capital projects fund investment earnings to the general fund. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second?
Any discussion on this?
So we discussed this in our study session, and this is the interest.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, seeing none, we'll call for a vote. And that also passes unanimously. Next item is the second reading of board policies number 7230, advertising partnerships and sponsorships, 7260, gifts, 7326, unclaimed and reissued warrants, 7330, payroll authorization and control, and 7331, pay periods. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
I'm just going to quickly restate that I did this last board meeting, that I'd like us to have a conversation related to the equity in the different schools regarding the science teachers. And so I'm going to go ahead and not make this a big issue right now, but I'd like to have that further discussion off, at a different time.
As part of the budget, ongoing budget discussions? Is
Yeah,
that-
budget discussion, I don't know, maybe for thinking about the policy ahead of time next year. I'm not quite sure where it fits, but just, I don't want to make a policy change right now because I don't know all the implications of it, but I think we need to have a broader discussion. Maybe it's a study session or,
Maybe something about the impact, like we saw today in Lydia's presentation, about the impact of the different staffing that we're looking at, is maybe the impact that would be to put that into our elementary schools.
Well, I think you were asking about the different levels that schools are able to raise financially and then fund, and how we try to equalize that at the district.
that and also what Dawn's saying.
Oh.
And then how are those used, that it provides, what I had mentioned is that a lot of the east side schools end up having the science teachers, while the schools over here aren't getting the science teachers for whatever reason this is, whether it's, and I also know there's less money being able to be raised at some of the smaller schools, but I think some of the services they get we're not getting over in some of our other schools. So just, and find out, maybe we can get a better indication. So I'm talking more specifically about what's known versus what's not known, and what do we have at these different schools. How many science teachers are funded by the PTSA? How many Title I schools do we have that have this kind of same equitable science program? And then how many schools do we have that don't have anything? So, just a study session around that dialogue. And I think what you said is also helpful.
Well, and I think the budget question is a good one because, for example, for many years, Timbercrest was the only junior high without an activity bus because their PTA didn't choose to fund it. But now with the budget increasing, they were able to get an activity bus, and it's helping a lot of kiddos get extra help after school. So I think, talking about it as we look at how budget might be changing, how class size reduction, how that's going to play out. See how it goes.
I think we hopefully provided information about where we have science specialists that are PTA funded, or where we have staff members that are PTA funded, because it's more than science specialists in a couple of schools. I think it's a good conversation to have. I think it's one that was had at a very detailed level several years ago, but clearly not with this board. And I would just say, not to start the conversation here, but one of the equity questions is, just because a school community chooses to fund something, should that obligate the district to fund something comparable in all other schools simply because one school community chooses to do that? I think there's an equity implication for that. I also think there's just a practicality question about that. As we saw earlier in the agenda today, it's not that some of our other schools, PTAs, aren't giving significant amounts of money. We saw several very large donations approved by the board on the consent agenda. They're just choosing to give it to other things. So should we be giving $30,000 to all schools for playground equipment because one PTA does that? I mean, those are similar types of questions as well.
I think that part of the conversation was about that it was producing better student scores. There was an impact to the science teachers that was positive, and I think that probably is part of the conversation.
And we could look at that too. I think we sent some information that had science scores in there, and I don't believe in a reading of that you could definitely make a case that there's a direct correlation between having a science specialist and a school's science scores. There are a number of schools that have
Fernwood.
superior science scores who do not have science specialists, either district or PTA funded. So I think that's all a very worthwhile conversation.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I think it's hard to have it up.
Sure.
Yeah, no, part of the
So-
budget, yeah.
It's,
Be nice to have a study session. And maybe, you know,
Budgeted.
Sherry could, or we want to have people that aren't in the, can we have, like, could Sherry present in a study session? Can you do that? About,
Let's
oh,
talk
here's
about
what
BTA.
BTSA do, here, you know, can you have different?
in some ways, it's like-
brainstorming while I'm up here, so I probably.
Your study
the board can have somebody that's willing do it if they want
Not to
to.
be presumptuous.
But, you know, I think there's a prioritization as well. It's both budget and prioritization, so it's a big conversation that we should schedule.
Okay.
All that discussion aside, we'll call for a vote on this one. And that passes unanimously. Next item on the agenda is second reading of board policy number 9400, enrollment demographics task force. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second?
Any discussion on this? Great work they do. Seeing none, we'll call for a vote. And that also passes unanimously. So next item on the agenda is the action items that were removed from the consent agenda. So the first one is the NRAP agreement, 2015-17, non-represented. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, we'll call for a vote. And that is approved. 4-1. Next item on the agenda is waiting for my screen to move. 2015-17 NASA agreement. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Any further discussion? We'll call for a vote. And again, that's 4 ayes, 1 nay. Next item on the agenda is the North Shore, the 2015-17 Assistant Superintendent and Executive Director Agreement. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second?
Any further discussion? Seeing none, we'll call for a vote. And again, 4 ayes, 1 nay. Next item on the agenda is the Deputy Superintendent salary schedule. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second?
Second?
Any discussion on this item? Seeing none, we'll call for a vote. And that has 4 ayes, 1 nay. Next item on the agenda is the superintendent contract amendment. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion on this item?
The language, I have a note on that one as well. In the second paragraph on the first page, for calculation purposes, total compensation shall include the sum of base salary, transportation reimbursement, tax-sheltered optional retirement program contribution, educational degree stipend, and the value of annual unused vacation day conversion to compensation for the 2014-15 contract year. Do you know what the difference is? The state isn't sending that much money should a COLA come through. So if you're talking about a COLA, the state certainly won't be sending that. What does the state figure the COLA on when
So
it
this-
figures it?
I'm sorry, the state for certificated administrators would figure the COLA on the current allocation for certificated administrators, which is, I don't have the exact figure, but it's somewhere around $57,000, $58,000 a year.
And so that's it, that's what the state is sending, and so the COLA would be that, whatever that COLA
What
ends
the
up
district
being,
would receive in state funding would be whatever the COLA percentage is
Right.
on the state allocation, which is $57,000 or $58,000 a year per certificated administrator.
And do you know what the actual amount is of this increase?
This was the figure that was shared with the board.
Mhm.
So it was the figure that was total, I think it was 241,917 was the total.
Correct.
Okay.
Or less.
Are we, I have to ask a clarifying question here, because we had an executive session. So I guess I'm a little bit, I don't know what, can you clarify what I can say in public, or?
So the discussion from the executive session was a confidential discussion, but the outcome is what we are voting on tonight. So if it's related to the vote on it, Larry, you want to weigh in on the?
I think you
The
can
gallery.
you
I
can
just all
say-
started
Yeah.
talking, then I stopped myself thinking maybe I need to ask that question.
By your own protocols, the executive session conversations are confidential and privileged, private amongst the board. I would concur with Janet that you have an action item before you that has specific provisions to it. It would be appropriate to speak to any and all of those.
I can say that I'll be voting no again this year. I think that I would like to see some differences, and I have stated that in my evaluation, and so I'll be voting no. That's easy enough. That certainly isn't getting into details, and I've certainly made those clear and exact.
I also will be voting no, and I made that known to the board. I think that the raise is too much for this coming year, and was not what I was in favor of or what I saw as appropriate. I think that we have many good things happening in the district, and we also have some growth areas, as we've heard. Not just here, but in other areas, and also with other negotiations we have going on. I think it's a higher precedent than what we should be setting, so I'll just stop there.
Yeah, okay. And I will just clarify that all other employees of the district will be getting a COLA should it come through the legislature. So I just want to clarify that for the public record and for board members. So I don't see any other discussion on this item, so we'll call for a vote. And that does pass with 3 in favor, 2 opposed. Next item on the agenda is the first information item, the right-of-way dedication at Crystal Springs. Do board members have any questions or discussion on that?
Are we blocking the sidewalk? Are we not allowing people to use the sidewalk? Okay, good. Well, that's just a head shake. That's great. Thanks.
Seeing no other discussion, we'll move on to the next item, which is the 2015-16 budget development process, certificated staffing. And we talked a little bit in study session, but do board members have any questions for Lydia?
I did have a specific question, this may be more for Becky than Lydia. With all the growth, I was surprised to see that our special ed at elementary was going down. I'm sure there's an explanation for that.
Oh.
Kathleen's ready to jump.
If you need my help, I can. What we could do is look it up for you, some specifics. What the team, the special ed team does is actually projects students by learning center, mid-level classrooms, functional skills, academics, and then staffs accordingly. So I would have to look at the details, but I could compile something for you if you like.
If you could also pass along that, my question was related to, I thought that we were growing in this area, so I thought I had heard that message, and that we also had a lot more, we call them fragile, or FSA.
Medically fragile.
Medically fragile, okay. So yeah, that would also be great information to get.
Just the instructional answer is that we're providing more tier 1 supports for kids in the classroom, so we're not overqualifying children for special education, which has been a problem in the past. So we've got some good supports in and are able to meet their needs without labeling them as special needs learners. So we're actually proud of the fact that that number is going down, because much like the gifted program, we're capturing that percentage that's actually needing that specialized instruction. Okay.
Thank you. Do you want her to stay up here for the next item on the agenda, which is the classified staffing?
I did have a really stupid question on that one. Okay, so Title I, how is it going up by 0.31 How does that happen?
It's a system rounding issue. So every 4-hour position is a .367,
Okay.
but if you add more decimals in your computer program, then it's going to round different.
Got it, okay, thank you.
Okay.
I think we were adding 3 minutes to something. Thank you.
Seeing no further discussion on this, we'll go to the next item, which is the Board Policy 7521, 5271. It's numbered wrong on the, typo on the
Should be 52.
enclosure, but it is 5271. And you see both 5271 policy and then the procedure that accompanies it are listed here as well.
So I asked for this to be put on the agenda because I would like to see us create either a policy that looks closer to the documents that I sent in an email, or at the very least, a whistleblower hotline that is manned by someone not within district personnel that can then direct to appropriate people where things should be directed. If it's an internal problem, then it goes internal, and if it's an external investigation is needed, then it can make that recommendation. But a hotline for whistleblowers is what I'd like to see added. And I think that would not necessarily need to be in the policy, but could be in the procedure.
So, my thought on this, and this is my thought, because of what I've learned about the Public Records Act in Washington State, the thing I just want to make, if we want to add more detail to the policy in terms of, I know there's not much detail about turnaround or response times, if we want to strengthen it, I'm all for it. I just, what I thought of is when Leanna advises us when we go out to speak with the public, you want to make sure that you set expectations in terms of what your response is going to be. And if, and what got me thinking about this is, as I poked around Vancouver, Seattle, Spokane school districts, none of them have a hotline. But we were told by council that the Public Records Act in the state of Washington is so tough that we can't promise confidentiality. Someone can file a public records request and get the information, and the thing I just worry about is if we say, okay, we're going to have this whistleblower hotline, are we promising a level of confidentiality that legally we can't really support?
If it's
Does that make
anonymous.
sense? What's that?
If it's anonymous, they can make it anonymous.
So how, let me just ask you, how would you act on an anonymous complaint? How would that go to completion?
So if we look at the bullying hotline that we're talking about getting, we would allow anonymous calls into that. And so I would just equate it with the same thing, like you could still investigate it. I guess I don't understand why we have to, why we need to have the name, address, phone number of whoever is calling in if they have something that they don't feel comfortable giving their name to. I don't know why we still couldn't take that from a neutral point of view and say, we need to look at it. It doesn't mean that this is really going on.
It just
And why would
triggers an
they need to be
investigation.
threatened by it?
No, it's not the point. I was just taking it down. It's not,
Right.
I don't mean to sound like, no, don't
And
mean to
I'm not
sound
saying
threatening.
you're
I'm trying to think logistically, you know what I mean? Like, if we're going to roll this out, and I just got thinking, why, even the city of Seattle, they don't have a whistleblower hotline. I'm like, it makes me wonder if the Public Records Act in the state of New York has just gotten us, or the New York, excuse me, the state of Washington has gotten us to this point where it's just, we just can't promise confidentiality. And so, if we need another avenue for folks to come to the board, maybe, if we need, if there is a need out there, if we have examples of needs of how we need to collect concerns and reports of any sort of improper governmental action, absolutely. I just was thinking ahead and not wanting to overpromise something we couldn't overpromise. That's all. In terms of having a confidential whistleblower hotline, because then if someone reports something that's 100%
They haven't given their
confidential,
name and it just gets
Right.
investigated then.
it just gets investigated.
Yeah.
That's all. And that's not something that we could do, I guess, if a complaint came to us.
That is very far outside the
That's true.
duties and the powers that are granted to us by the law, so.
I think it just provides a need, or it doesn't, why should we be involved? I guess. As Janet just said.
And just, I will say that when I was running for office, so I think my reasoning might be different than some of the other reasoning, but when I was running for this position, I did have several employees come to me, and this isn't saying, I just think there's not an avenue to safely go tell a story that, if, let's say, you're feeling like you're sexually harassed, if you feel that something's going on that's breaking the law, that becomes this level up here
Right.
that sometimes people, feel they won't be believed, feel that they, who's the boss that you're going to tell, and a lot of times it's someone telling on another fellow employer, sharing their worldview or what's happened to them about another employee, and that can be a very uncomfortable situation. So I just feel like having I think a lot of businesses do that, where there are kind of safety lines or places to call to you know, if you feel that there's something not appropriate going on. So back to what I was originally saying, when I was running for office, I did hear these stories out there. And it's not like, I don't particularly remember what every story was because I was so new, so I was just kind of didn't have a place to put all those stories at the time. I'm not saying there was a lot, but there were some, is what I'm saying, and, you know, and, so I have heard that.
It would be surprising in an
Yeah,
organization of this size if there weren't
correct.
complaints.
Well, yeah, for sure,
Absolutely, yeah.
for sure.
And it wouldn't be surprising if people aren't, you know, maybe not following what they're supposed to be doing too, and then have some place to be able to safely come forward.
Right.
So this is the whistleblower policy. Some of what you're talking about is outside the scope of this particular policy. There is protection under the law for a whistleblower policy. It's illegal to retaliate. So that's what this policy talks about. I'm not discounting what you're saying. I'm just saying that's not what this policy says. So I don't know if to...
Well, there are a number of considerations about anonymous complaints. In the first place, they're difficult to investigate because they're anonymous, and it's difficult to make contact with a complainant and find out details about the complaint. The other thing is that employees who are being complained against, or who the complaint is about, have rights as well. Not everybody always has good motivations in making complaints, and sometimes the complaints are not founded in fact. So, in fact, we have a number of collective bargaining agreements which basically make anonymous complaints against employees not actionable. So, there are, as Janet points out, the whistleblower policy and the law in Washington State makes it illegal to retaliate against an employee who brings forward a report of improper government action, and that employee, if there was retaliation, would have a cause of action against the employer. So I think there are a lot of protections in place. We also have a number of policies that allow employees redress for sexual harassment or charges or complaints of discrimination, or a number of other procedures that have timelines and reporting investigation procedures and reporting requirements in them. So I think there are a lot of existing avenues for making complaints of a variety of kinds. This particular policy is required by law. It has to do with employees being able to report gross misconduct and fraudulent behavior on the part of other government officials without fear of retaliation or fear of losing their job, and there are lots of protections built in around that. I think the other thing we would worry about in terms of a hotline is just workability and functionality of that is how would that actually work, and if having a lot of anonymous complaints that we are not able to investigate or aren't in the end actionable in any kind of way would not, I don't think, serve any useful purpose. So that would be our concerns about that.
But so nobody has a hotline? I mean, when you ask the question, how would we do something? I'm always curious when that question goes, so not, gosh, we don't know how we would do something. Nobody else is doing that?
Well,
I think that people are from the things that I forwarded.
I'm not aware of any other district that has a whistleblower hotline. And you,
In the state, I can find one in the state, and then yeah. I
you
think
find
you
one in
found,
other
you
state
well,
then?
you found one in Portland, Oregon, Guilderland, New York.
I've
I mean, there's
forgotten.
other, I looked at them,
I'm wondering if the board would be interested, in light of Jeff's input in the ongoing discussion about this, if we perhaps asked for a legal analysis from Buzz or others, because I think there are some legitimate benefits potentially, but I think there are some drawbacks. But I think it would be wise to understand those clearly from a perspective of the law, of our bargaining agreements, of potential liability that the district may be opening themselves up to, of potential actionability or lack of actionability from anonymous complaints that might come forward. I think at the end of the day, that's one element that I think would be important to know. I think at the end of the day, it's always, Kimberly, I think you bring up a great point. There's always the personal discomfort that I think comes from anybody who needs to lodge a complaint or feels like they need to lodge a complaint. Whether it's, this is a person I work next to, or I'm just uncomfortable talking about this, or I'm uncomfortable bringing this forward because it's just awkward. And I don't know that an anonymous hotline or any process eliminates that element, that sort of human element of bringing a concern or complaint forward, but I think it's a well-founded one.
So if you were to ask Buzz, is this a written report that you're going to be asking him for? Because if he's going to have a meeting with just one or two
No, I was
specific
thinking
board
about
members?
asking him to prepare just a legal summary and analysis for us that would be in written format to share with the entire board.
I'd be in favor of that, yeah. It'd be great.
Thank you. I appreciate you hearing that, Larry, and being willing to give that analysis, because that kind of takes it out of our hands when we don't really know.
All right, next item on the agenda is first reading of board policy 72.